thought about the American symbol these days, many echoed the thoughts of Heather Ivey of South Carolina.
A reckless band of miscreants has stolen and perverted that figure for me. They have usurped our nation's symbol of unity and cheaply rebranded it with disregard and mockery. They have changed the meaning of the grand old flag for me. I do not want to be misidentified as a Make America Great Again person. So yes, my relationship and my perspective of the flag has certainly morphed.
But then in November, when President-elect Joe Biden won the 2020 election, many of his supporters took to the streets to celebrate, waving U.S. flags that they had stored away for years. Listener Lorraine Dewey of North Carolina says she felt compelled to hang up her flag again.
God bless America. I can hang my flag out now and not have it represent hate and bigotry and just the god-awful stuff that's been going on for the last 4 years. I can't be any more excited than I am right now, and I want you to know I love you all.
For Judy Bartek of Massachusetts, Biden's win renewed her love for the flag.
It represents our caring about one another, being kind, respectful for our differences. It represents the opportunity for healing as a nation.
For other listeners, President Trump's loss has made them question if the flag represents them anymore, while others told us they've never questioned the flag and that it stands for freedom. So what do all of these evolving perceptions of the flag really mean? And what do they say about the state of our politics? Ben Gaskins, professor of political science at Lewis and Clark University in Portland, has been looking into this, and he joins us now. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on.
President Trump politicized the significance of the flag, but this isn't the first time that the U.S. flag has divided the country. The Vietnam War and more recently 9/11 were two national events that galvanized people either around the flag or against the flag. What symbolic role does the flag play?
Well, the flag is one of the most meaningful symbols of what it means to be American for a majority of the country. And polls have consistently shown that the flag represents to people these ideas of freedom and liberty, equality, and democracy. And the United States has long been thought of to be a creedal nation. That means that people can be Americans if they adopt this American creed, regardless of their race, religion, or national origin. But that creed, what it means to be American, is contested and it's complicated, and it means different things to different people across the political spectrum. And so how people approach the flag and how they view it will also be dependent upon their political ideology and the moment that we are in. But Americans have long had a strong notion of civil religion, where patriotic sentiments are often closely intertwined with a religious identity. And Americans tend to sacralize their founding documents and individuals like George Washington and other of our founders. And so that means that our civil religion affects our political discourse, and it takes on kind of a religious character, where political leaders use patriotic and religious language to demonstrate their Americanness, to elevate political discourse, and also to really play up into this mythologizing of American exceptionalism and American character. And so Americans follow suit. A Gallup poll shows that 86% of Americans see displaying the flag as an important part of patriotism, demonstrating this American character.
How is President Trump's use of the flag and the way his administration has embraced the stars and stripes different or similar to past presidents?
Well, all presidents and political actors will include patriotism and the symbol of patriotism. It's not for President Trump to try to use symbols of the country like the flag and patriotism to really justify his presidency and to, I guess, unify the country. But that last question about unification, I think really does stand out for President Trump, where patriotism and the symbols of the country, the flag itself, have moved more to become a political weapon rather than a statement. So President Trump has been very clear in his efforts to connect his policies and his with support for the country and patriotism. He's criticized his political opponents as being un-American or hating America for being unpatriotic. President Trump has criticized very strongly athletes for not standing for the national anthem and argued that they are disrespecting the flag and therefore disrespecting the military and the country overall. And so I think that is really different than what we have seen in the past, and it helps to understand why we have seen such an extension of the partisan divide on how the flag is perceived and how patriotism is understood.
That wedge that you're referring to, it seems to be closing just a bit. We've seen, especially after the presidential election, a movement of what people call reclaiming of the flag. What exactly does that mean?
We've seen over a long period of time Republicans being somewhat more patriotic or willing to say that they are patriotic or extremely proud to be an American than Democrats. But for Democrats especially, this seems to be very contingent on who is in power. During Obama's administration, Democrats' patriotism or their willingness to say that they are very proud to be American went up pretty substantially, went up over 10 points. And when Trump was in office, Democrats' support or their pride in being American dropped in half. And so it seems to be very contingent, and part of that is because of President Trump's desire to link support for him and support for his policies with being American and with being patriotic. And so as Trump is preparing to leave office, many people on the left and Democrats are trying to reclaim that universality of these American symbols like the flag, to say that even though conservatives and Republicans tend to report being more patriotic, of having greater pride in their American identity, that these symbols and these attitudes are not a partisan thing, that Democrats and people on the left love their country just as much as Republicans and people on the right, even if they have different attitudes and different approaches to demonstrating that. There seems to be a concerted effort by many groups on the left to try to argue that what the American flag represents, what Americanism means, is something different. That it represents inclusiveness, that it represents equality and freedom in a way that is very important for people on the left and their ideology.
And with that, though, is there really any other symbol that can really bring together people in this way, a symbol that holds the same value? What other symbols of unity might actually emerge or need to emerge to provide what you're talking about?
It's a great question, and one of the challenges of our current political moment is we are polarized not just on policy, but we are polarized socially as well. And so Republicans and Democrats not only have different attitudes towards spending and social welfare and things like that, but they have different ways of living, different ways of seeing the world. And so there are fewer things that the political parties will have in common in terms of their lifestyle, their things that they enjoy, the things that represent who they are, where they live. People are becoming more fragmented in all of those patterns. So I think it's heartening in one way that there is such an effort by groups on the left to reclaim the flag, because it really is one of the few symbols that people across the political spectrum really can hold to.
That's Ben Gaskins, professor of political science at Lewis and Clark University in Portland, Oregon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we want to thank all of our listeners who wrote and called in to share their thoughts on the U.S. flag. This is Here and Now.
On the New Year's Eve edition of Fresh Air, we have some wonderful music to end a not-so-wonderful year. We'll feature our concert by and interview with singer-songwriter Loudon Wainwright and Vince Giordano, who leads the band The Nighthawks. He plays tuba and bass. They teamed up for a new album of songs from the 1920s and 30s called I'd Rather Lead a Band. Join us.
This afternoon at 3 and again tonight at 7 on WHYY.
WHYY, your NPR member station in Philadelphia. Good afternoon, it's 12:51. The sports world screeched to a halt in March when the pandemic really started to spread. Eventually, the games resumed, but without fans, and in some cases, professional leagues took unprecedented steps to keep going, playing in bubbles. Well, to wrap up the noon hour, coming up next on Here and Now, we consider a sports year like no other with our sports analyst.
Funding for Here and Now comes from the listeners of WBUR Boston, from MathWorks, creators of MATLAB and Simulink software for technical computing and model-based design. MathWorks, accelerating the pace of discovery in engineering and science. Learn more at mathworks.com. And from Staples, with supplies to get business done, no matter where it gets done. From ink and toner cartridges to technology like webcams and networking accessories. More at Staples stores or staples.com. Staples.
It's Here and Now. The Associated Press recently named LeBron James and Naomi Osaka as its Athletes of the Year. James led the Los Angeles Lakers to the NBA title. He also spoke out for Black Lives Matter.
It's not a movement. I don't like the word movement because unfortunately in America and society, there ain't been no damn movement for us. There ain't been no movement.
And when she won the U.S. Open, Osaka wore masks that bore the names of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor.
I just felt like while I'm here, while for some reason there's a TV camera on me, I might as well use it to the best of my ability.
Mike Pesca is Here and Now sports analyst. He hosts the daily podcast, The Gist, at Slate.com. And Mike, how did these two voices change the discourse?
I think they both had a big impact, especially LeBron James, just because he's the most looked at and noted athlete in the world. And him bringing to the forefront, not that it wasn't already there, but adding his voice to the many voices, along with Oprah Winfrey and Beyonce, about what happened with Breonna Taylor. You know, everyone knows her name now, but it wasn't written in stone that would be. It took many people who already had a platform talking about her and what happened to her in Louisville to raise her story to that of national attention. And with Osaka, you know, for her sport, she's a great tennis player. You could argue the best tennis player, but she was the most active in the sport of tennis in terms of raising awareness for these issues. You needed to have the marriage of the great on-court play with the sentiment that marks the zeitgeist of the time, and that's why these two were appropriate choices.
I'm also thinking about just the differences in the way collectively we're talking about all of this, along with these athletes. It was different a few years ago with Colin Kaepernick.
It was when the NFL came down hard on Colin Kaepernick, and I think we could fairly say blackballed him, or at least didn't give him an honest chance to ever make a squad because of his beliefs and his acting out on those beliefs. The consensus was, whether you agree that was fair or unfair, well, of course that's what the NFL is going to do. That's who the NFL is. That's the part of the culture that they reflect. And now it's different. Now it would seem if Kaepernick engaged in such an action that there would be no repercussions. In fact, many NFL athletes have been very vocal, and they have been, to some extent, a large extent, supported by the league. So it really has changed so much, at least in terms of what the leagues themselves, how they countenance their athletes speaking out on issues important to them.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the sports performances this year. We saw some great wins in the courts and in the field this year. The sports was really amazing. That's how it sounded on Fox when the LA Dodgers won the World Series for the first time in 32 years. What were the highlights for you?
Yeah, in terms of on-the-field performance, the playoffs really got good after an odd baseball season, only 60 games playing before cardboard cutouts, and the Dodgers were the best team. Although now, what occupies your mind is Justin Turner, who tested positive for COVID, going out and celebrating with his teammates.